Hello, my name is Barbara Colm. Let me introduce you to Zach Sentementes from Advanced Advocacy. And we are now talking today about the role of a patent system and IP, of course. And we will, in times like these, the Corona crisis is still going on, of course, discuss international trade policies. Zach is joining me from Washington, D.C., and I'm based here in Austria. And this is another interview for our Digital Free Market Roadshow, for a tour that we usually do through 40 countries in Europe. This year, of course, we do them digitally, and maybe later this year, we will all meet together physically, wherever is possible. But let me first start. Hello, Zach, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Barbara. I wish I was there too.
Yes, well, you will definitely.
Yeah.
We would have had you at the European Resource Bank meeting in Rome speaking later this year in June. However, this is postponed, but you know, there will always be opportunities and chances.
Can't wait.
Zach is working for Advanced Advocacy, which is an independent advocacy and public affairs firm that specializes on issue campaigns and coalition management and third-party work. And we've known this group for a long time. We have dealt with advanced advocacy on many issues that are important to our pro-market libertarian think tanks, and Zach has been with Advanced Advocacy for the past 2 years. He's there and is specializing on third-party activation, and of course, given his background as a Bachelor of Arts in Science and a degree in Political Science, he has a lot of background. By the way, he also has a minor in Mandarin studies. So maybe we should also talk about China a little bit on the trade issue, because I think, after all, you have been there at the University of Beijing and where you studied communication. So this would definitely fit to what we are focusing on. And as you know, the topic of the Free Market Roadshow is disruptive innovation. And you know, what is more disruptive than what we see these days? Our economies have been run to the ground. Disruption on the supply and on the demand side. It's a shock that nobody could have foreseen. And nowadays, what shall we do? Can we, as enterprise, and you represent entrepreneurs and big firms and businesses, what can they do in terms of how can they stick to their patents, to their IP system? Is this still, in times of Corona, where everybody, at least the politicians, say everything is for free? Can we stick to that, protecting property rights? Or where do you see the future?
That's a great question, Barbara. And you know, I would say right now the importance of intellectual property has never been more apparent than it is now. I mean, you see a significant number of industries kind of working around the clock to do what they can to eradicate the novel coronavirus, whether that be the medical device industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry, and then industries that you would think have very little to do with the healthcare or health science, life science sector. I mean, you see it with the textile industry too, continuing to kind of ramp up production to make masks. You see it with everyone within the private sector really galvanizing around each other and working together in unison. You know, I find that, for instance, when you're looking at vaccines, you see the biopharmaceutical and biotech industry and researchers are trying to accelerate the development of new vaccine candidates and testing, you know, existing treatments as well at a record speed, and that's directly because of patents, which have served, I would say, an indispensable role in really spurring that medical treatment, and especially in pandemic responsiveness.
Let me ask you one question right here. I mean, we see international institutions that say, you know, we must abolish patents, we must abolish those patent rights and IP rights because we need to help those people who are infected, and they think that by doing so, we will have a faster solution. How do you see that?
We are seeing that here in the United States on the domestic front, despite having arguably, I would say, the strongest patent system. You're seeing that in the halls of Congress for sure. I mean, lawmakers in Washington, a fair amount, a cadre of lawmakers are basically trying to confiscate the patents on the coronavirus treatments before the biotech companies have even finished developing them. So, you know, they're relying on a relatively obscure law known as the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980. That statute allows the government to seize drug patents and grant other companies the right to make them if the price is deemed unreasonable, and 1 cent of public funding was used for the basic research. Now, what they're doing, they're deliberately misinterpreting Bayh-Dole. The law does not support basically seizing of patents, having the government come in and, you know, expand the government's power over the private sector. You know, the reality is the law does not support that. It's really what it does is it permits the government to march in and license patents, you know, when the research is public or that the research is supported by the public, but only under very, very specific conditions. And in this pandemic, that's non-existent. So the legal requirement for march-in power is that the patent invention is not being sold or licensed in a reasonable time or on reasonable terms. And you've seen quite the opposite, where over 300 different clinical trials for vaccine and treatments are currently underway. There has been commitments by every number, all basically of the actors within that sector, committing to ensuring that pricing is affordable. So what I see this is, at least in the domestic front, and also on the international front too, which I'll get into, you're basically seeing lawmakers trying to ensure that government power is expanded and basically manipulating or using this crisis to do so. On the international front, I'd just make a few notes too, because you're definitely seeing it.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second.
Sorry,
playing the devil's advocate.
Yes, please.
Could, in other words, property rights are undermined?
Absolutely. So that's what they say. And unfortunately, the status quo right now for a lot of the activist groups out there, as well as a lot of the big government advocates, is that intellectual property is undermining a coronavirus vaccine, when it's quite the opposite. You know, intellectual property has continued to serve as the incentive in a lot of ways for these innovations during pandemics. And even so, what the biotech and biopharmaceutical companies, as well as, like I said, many other industries, they ensure that everything is affordable once these treatments come out. So I'll give you an example, you know, of why the patent system is so integral for pandemic responsiveness, and why it's so expensive. So it's a lot more complicated than folks make it out to be. And you may have heard this study before. It's, you know, the FDA has said, and according to Tufts University, they estimate that on average it takes 10 to 15 years of research and $2.6 billion in investments to bring a drug to market. You know, for each FDA approved drug, there are thousands of failures in the drug research pipeline. So, you know, you have very, very small odds to finally get that drug to market. Plus, the massive R&D efforts are supported by $129 billion in funding by private companies, more than triple the amount of $43 billion in public funding provided by the federal government. Again, that gets conflated in a lot of these arguments today that you see domestically in the United States and internationally. So I would say, if anything, intellectual property rights is really the catalyst for the cure and the catalyst for ensuring that it's affordable and ensuring that it's not the federal government stopping it or hindering the vaccine from even being made. On the international side too, you're seeing that same subversion of patent rights and manipulating or using this crisis to do so. You have current government proposals and issuances in Brazil, Canada, Chile, South Africa, Germany, Israel right now. So a number of our allies internationally, and what they're doing is issuing compulsory licensing on a drug. So saying basically the government will be able to, the drug will be licensed, and much like in Marchand and Bayh-Dole, what will happen is they're hijacking the property rights of the innovator, again, before the invention or vaccine is even created. So I see this as hugely problematic, and really, if anything, hurting our chances of achieving a vaccine.
I think it will be a huge issue, and it slows down, of course, and it de-incentivizes the companies to invest and work on a vaccine. But
yeah,
since we all live in the times of the corona virus, and what happened first? The trade and global supply chains broke down. And this was the biggest shock, I think, nobody would have anticipated. In 2008, when the crisis occurred, 60% of the countries were hit with reduction of their GDP. These days, it's more than 90% of the countries in the world that were hit. So it's this new thing that we see: globalism versus the folly of protectionism and export bans. What is your take on those two things?
Great question. I mean, this is nothing.
Let's start probably with global supply chain versus the protectionism, the folly of protectionism.
Absolutely. I mean, as far as ensuring that, our international trading system and our institutions in place to ensure efficacy and ensure that we're able to get the most quality products as quick as possible, I would say is as red-blooded American as apple pie. And I would say globally, certainly working with our allies instead of working against them, is soft power is so much more important, especially in times like this of a crisis. It's a great question that you ask, because right now everybody's feeling the pain, and we're realizing that in a lot of ways we're looking at the international trading system, and you're seeing certain members who have continued to push unfortunate mandates which would effectively hinder international trade and hinder free markets come out and rally around short-sighted mandates like Buy American, which you're seeing with certain members of Congress, and then a minority within the administration, specifically Peter Navarro from the National Economic Council, who's now President Trump's advisor on a lot of things COVID. Peter Navarro has very little experience in the trading, trade community past in academia, and unfortunately, from the very beginning, he's wanted to ensure that there's more government control over the market, and basically, slap tariffs, which are taxes on products coming in or out of the country, get into trade wars with our friends, ensure, a strong proponent of protectionism and more of Friedrich List and less of Adam Smith, and certainly less of Hayek than anyone, I think, that's been in the White House or is in the White House currently. So you see this rising faction of protectionism. And
well,
it's
maybe we should remind him of the great French philosopher Bastiat, who said, when goods cross borders, weapons will not. So
yes, well, it's that same kind of economic nationalism, and where you see militaristic terms come out. He frequently uses, and a lot of these proponents of these export bans using phrases like economic flashpoint, or trying to utilize, or once again manipulate the free market to match their ideals to exert more government control over our private sector. And certainly, we've seen a number of export bans around the world right now in many, many different countries. So it's not just a domestic problem. All, proponents of the free market and champions of the free market are trying to remind them is it's short-sighted and unrealistic to reshore certain supply chains, which is what, there's been a executive order hasn't come out yet, but has been passed around through the different agencies and is waiting right now to be released to reshore the pharmaceutical supply chain. This is just one example of many where you're seeing, you're seeing economic nationalism seep into our international trading system and into our leadership. They're going on a statistic that is false. They say that 80% of the dependency of our active pharmaceutical ingredients come from China. And that's wrong. That's flatly wrong. It's a mistruth. Only 13% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients come from China, and we have a significantly diverse supply chain. And the way to ensure more efficacy, more safety, and more reliability is to increasingly diversify our supply chain, not pull back and have one single supplier or ourselves think that we can basically quickly become an infant industry overnight in the United States. And instead of relying on our allies and relying on the trading system that we, originally were a big part of creating or at least championing. So I think it's very foolish.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think people completely forget that together the US, Germany,
Yes.
China, Japan, Great Britain, Italy, and France represent 60% of the world's GDP, plus they represent 65% of the world's industry production and 41% of world's exports of goods. I mean,
Yes.
you have to look realistically at the numbers. I mean, you just can't shut that down.
Right.
From one day to the other. I mean, will we go back to the Middle Ages?
It seems like these folks want to. And, instead of thinking of strategic long-term answers in unison with our allies, slapping, like I said, a short-sighted, discriminatory export ban does very little but raise prices on products and, create scarcity. So, much like you're seeing price controls in a lot of ways seep into basically the drug pricing argument, as well as many, many other issues, including the auto industry. You're seeing the same thing. You're seeing that same kind of basically government fiat or government mandate to close the supply chain and limit our freedom of choice, our freedom of being able to work overseas with our partners or being able to source our products. And, I think that's a real shame, especially in terms of, using a crisis as an opportunistic tool to exert protectionism. It's a real problem.
And most importantly, destroying wealth or not providing us with the opportunity to create wealth.
Yes.
So, Zach, this was really very informative. But lastly, may I, since you are an expert on China as well, may I ask you, what is your take on the current situation with the COVID crisis and all the rumors that we see coming in from the US over Australia, France, bashing China, holding them responsible? What is your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to really think, once we're through this crisis, we really need to take a step back and look at and further analyze, the after effects of China, how the Chinese government and CCP effectively, tried to tamp down on a crisis without really communicating a lot of this internationally till it was too late. So I think there's room to have that examination, but the first step to doing that is putting and refuting conspiracy theories. That's the first step. But I think we do need to have a conversation about overall, China's I guess China's reputation moving forward, and China as a nation that we want to deal with in future. The phase 1 trade deal, for instance, with China is not stopping because of coronavirus. So we just need to ensure that moving forward, we work strategically with our partners in the EU, with our partners worldwide, to create, a concerted effort at least having that conversation, but not alone, and certainly not by propping up, again, discriminatory export bans, xenophobic. There's a lot of xenophobia going on right now, especially in the United States, where you have, I think, probably 6 to 10 bills right now that are being introduced currently. All the Beat China Act, or the China, it's become a big platform and become very politicized. In my humble opinion, I would say the more we can do to kind of get away from that, but still really hold them accountable for this crisis.
And go back to reason.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, Zach, thank you very much. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing you live and having you attend our Free Market Roadshow events live, hopefully in fall this year, very soon. Otherwise, we stay tuned and we will have another couple of Zoom conversations. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, this was Zach Sentementes from Advanced Advocacy. My name is Barbara Colm, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please stay tuned with us. Stay with the Free Market Roadshow. Have a great day. Bye-bye, and stay healthy.